Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of Art Like Everything Else, the podcast. The podcast where we use art to talk about literally everything else. I'm your host, Mo, and this week we're going to be talking about creating our own worlds. I found two pieces of art that I believe coincides with this very conversation. So let's go ahead, jump right in so we can have this conversation. Alrighty, so for our first work of art, we're going to be talking about the movie Cool Runnings. So this movie was released in 1993, directed by John Turteltaub, and it follows. So this is going to be for those who want a 100% spoiler-free watch of the movie. I'm going to give you a brief description of the movie based on IMDb, and then I'm going to go into a few details about the movie to kind of discuss why it's related to today's conversation. And in doing so, I am going to do my best to not spoil so much of the movie that it's impossible to enjoy after I discuss it. So feel free to watch it afterwards. I'm not going to tell you every single thing that happens in the movie. With that being said, the description of the movie per IMDb is as follows. When a Jamaican sprinter is disqualified from the Olympic Games, he enlists the help of a dishonored coach to start the first Jamaican bobsled team. And so it is with and in this movie that I wanted to kind of start off with discussing kind of the idea of creating your own world. And what do I mean by creating your own world? I mean going against what others believe is even possible for you. So there are several cases of that happening in this movie. We see it in the beginning when people doubt the idea of a Jamaican bobsled team even being something that's possible because, again, it's Jamaica. Bobsledding is a winter sport and it's Jamaica. And then we also see it with people doubting like whether or not they're successful, whether or not they could even make it or actually get to pursuing these dreams of being in the Olympics as a bobsled team. And we see all of this happening throughout the movie. We see them going against the odds, or going against even like their direct parents who are telling them that they can't do this and that they shouldn't do this, and them having to decide to either fall into what everyone else is saying about them and or stand on their own 2 feet and do what they believe and what they want to be possible for themselves, despite what this whole world that's sort of been established around them keeps trying to portray and force on them. And so with that being said, we do have another work of art that I would like to talk about with in regards to today's conversation. So let's hop right on over so we can have this conversation. So for our next work of art, I'm going to be talking about the movie A Million Miles Away. This movie was directed by Alejandra Marquez Abella. And this movie, per IMDb, so just like last time, I'm going to give you the description based on IMDb, and then I'm going to talk a bit briefly about the movie itself, and then we'll hop into today's conversation so we can talk a bit more in depth about the conversation at hand. But I won't be spoiling so much of the movie that like it'll be impossible to watch and gain new insights. With that being said, per IMDb, A Million Miles Away is a biopic about Jose Hernandez and his path from a farm worker to becoming an engineer and an astronaut. A tale of perseverance, community, and sacrifice to accomplish a seemingly impossible dream. And so, in creating our own worlds, it is absolutely like it makes a lot of sense when you see and understand that Jose is a farm worker. And so, for a very long time, and honestly, a lot of people would assume that someone who is a farm worker would not be able to become an astronaut or even an engineer for that matter. And considering that this movie happened way in the past, so like it wasn't nearly as, I guess, accommodating or regular or normal as it would be considered now for there to be a lot of POC in what you would consider intellectually dominant fields or whatnot. Um, and I mean, because racism, not because like they aren't capable of doing that. We actually witnessed that in the movie too, where they're like, there's a scene where um they keep relegating him, even though he's also an engineer. They keep relegating him to busy, what is essentially like busy work and making copies. Um, but he was the one who found that there was like a mistake in why all of their experiments kept failing. But when he brought that to their attention, they still doubted him. And it was like, how did you find this? And like no one else on the team found it. And yeah, such is life. But we see that he has to go against all of the odds that are stacked up against him, of all the people who are saying because he grew up as a farmhand, he's really kind of only ever going to be and reach so far. Like that, because he lacked access to so many of the things that all of these other astronaut applicants had, he he was just not going to have his dream of one day becoming an astronaut, a dream he's had since he was little. It was just not going to come into fruition. But he stood against those odds, and he did not let the world determine what it was that he was supposed to do. He chose to go against that. And that's going to be a major point for today's conversation. So let's have today's conversation. So for today's conversation, if you see the title, you see that if when the world turns its back on you, and if you recognize where that movie quote comes from, then you know the other half of that quote is "You turn your back on the world." It's a quote from Timon from Lion King, and it's a quote I've come to really, really appreciate and really sort of rely on, and it's why it was part of the inspiration that inspired this today's particular video, because so often the world that is established will tell you that you cannot do this thing that you say that you desire. You cannot do this thing that you say you want to do, or you are put into these boxes. So a conversation I've had previously, you are placed in this box, and this is where you are supposed to exist. And so it is so often important that we do not let that world tell us who we are or what we are supposed to do. And so another part of what inspired today's conversation was a clip from a Coleman Domingo interview on Hot Ones. I'm going to link it in the description below, but it happened around the 17-minute mark, and he's discussing his time when he worked at SCAD, or he was like doing a lecture at SCAD, and one of the students did a monologue from, I forget the name of the actual monologue, but it was a monologue from a story that essentially was about a fat person, and it was related, I believe, to like pigs or something like that. And the girl who did performed it was heavier, and he questioned her and was like, "Why did you do this?" And she was like, "Well, the world is going to see me as this fat person, and they're going to kind of essentially want me to portray all these fat, funny characters. So I figured I might as well step into that box." And he had to tell her and be like, "I didn't see that in you when I like came here. Like you, I saw a queen. I saw all of these other things. I didn't see you in something like this." And he was more or less discussing how like you have to be able to see yourself when pursuing and going after the things that you want. And that's kind of why that quote from Timon is so important to me, actually, is because like when the world turns its back on you, when the world places you in this box, tells you what you're going to do, you just turn your back on the world. You decide for yourself that if you do not see me doing what it is that I desire to do, being the person that I desire to be, and having the roles or the experiences that I desire to experience, then I'm simply going to turn my back on you, and I will establish my own world going forward. And we saw that with the characters in our movie, so in Cool Runnings, no one ever, who would think of a bobsled team coming from Jamaica, a winter sports team coming from a place that doesn't see snow? No one would assume that. And so it makes sense that people kind of did doubt them, but our characters, so the people on our bobsled team, so like Doris, Yule, and all of the other people on the bobsled team, it makes sense that even the folks in their own country were like a bobsled team. And so when they were going around trying to raise money to get to making these dreams happen for themselves, people were literally laughing in their face because they doubted them, because they didn't see the world that these folks, that this bobsled team envisioned for themselves. And so they laughed in their face. But what did they do? Did this bobsled team kind of curb tail and or like deny themselves or deny that their desire to do and complete in as a bobsled team? No, they still did it. They still they was able to go and be on the bobsled and actually compete in the Olympic Games. And I think that is what is so important that we do. We don't let the world that we've been placed in, especially if you're in a marginalized community, don't let the world tell you what is and isn't okay for you to do and to exist as, for what is possible. And I'm not saying it's going to be easy, because we see that with our character with Jose Hernandez in A Million Miles Away, which is a biography. So it's based on a true story of a guy who grew up as a migrant worker in a migrant working family, who became not only a lab engineer, but also put in the work to actually become an astronaut. Even though so many people doubted his ability to ever get that far. So many people didn't believe in his ability to actually become an astronaut. He did everything, and still, like, there are so many times where he sent in an application to become an astronaut and he failed multiple occasions. There were things he lacked access, he just did not have, to facilities and to places and to resources that so many other people generally did have when it came to becoming an astronaut. And so all of this took so much longer for him, but he did not let that lack of resources stop him from continuing to pursue and chase after the world that he envisioned himself living in since he was younger. He did not let the lack of access, he did not let people's doubts about whether or not his dreams were actually possible persuade him in or he did not let people's doubts sway him in what it was he desired. Because no one would assume, or no one would think it was possible for a migrant worker to become an astronaut. There's so many qualifications, so many things that are necessary for folks to become. There's so many requirements and so much education and so much of things that are necessary when it comes to working for NASA, just in general. And so, of course, a lot of people doubted him. A lot of people did not understand his desire to become something that other people just did not think he was capable of. And the very, very tough part of this conversation, I think, that is going to be more or less necessary to have, is that sometimes the world that we are turning our back on is not only one that exists outside of ourselves and exists outside of maybe what you would consider to be like your immediate community, but it may also be the folks who are right there next to you. And that's not to, honestly, I think maybe I'll elaborate that a bit more in next week's minisode, but um, sometimes the people around you have also more or less been cultivated and what's the word I'm looking for? Primed and made to believe in the idea of a world that exists with a very specific way, and they're not allowed to exist outside of that. And so when the people around you are more or less primed to do that, they too becomes arbiters or like placeholders for the world that exists that you seek that does not reflect the world that they've been told and made to believe in. And so we see in both Cool Runnings and we see in A Million Miles Away how our characters they desire to exist outside of the established world. They desire to create a world for themselves. And then we see the people who are very close to them telling them, like, no, actually, that's not possible. No, you are silly for thinking that is something that you could do. And we have to see our characters grapple with the people they want to be in their corner, not understand or see where they're coming from, and not support them in the way they would like to be supported. And it's very difficult to come to terms with the idea of not having the support you wish you had or you thought you'd be able to have. Um, but I do think, even despite that, if you desire to exist in a very particular world, it is important that you pursue that world as it is. And so we see in both Cool Runnings and A Million Miles Away that they chose to go after what it is that they wanted to go after. They desired to live in a different type of world than the one that the world told them they were supposed to be in. And so instead of letting the world turn their back on them and them being denied the future and the realities that they desired, they turned their back on the world and chose to create the reality that they wanted, despite what everyone around them was saying, despite what society was saying, despite what the people who who maybe wanted to support them in the beginning, but did not believe in a world that they saw existing because they grew up in the type of worlds that they grew up in. And we want for that to be the case. We want to continue to pursue and go after the things that we want to pursue. And it is very important that we kind of continue to go after those things that we desire and that we want, because that's what's most important. So maybe, just maybe, when the world turns its back on you, you turning your back on the world too can be in art like everything else. Today's awe moment, I think I want to kind of more or less go a bit more into the when the world turns its back on you, you turn your back on the world. And that's going to look different for a lot of people. And I think a show that shows is able to show us this sort of perspective from a lot of different character viewpoints is none other than Avatar: The Last Airbender. And so in that show we see Aang more or less coming to terms with feeling like because he was given the role that he was giving as Avatar, the world he had previously saw for himself is no longer possible. And then we see with Toph, who was raised a very particular way, but she did not desire to be and exist in that way. So she chose to pursue and go after what it was she actually wanted to do. We saw that with Zuko when he came to terms with the fact that, like, maybe I actually don't want to do this or be like this, even though this being and existing in this Fire Nation has been all I've ever known. I've come to realize this doesn't feel like who I actually am. Like, these values do not align with the world that I believe I am meant to be a part of. And then we also see that with Katara and with Sokka and them coming to terms with and existing in a reality that they've existed in and wanting to see something and be a part of something different. And so I think so often we see this trope of defying the odds and going up against what seems impossible. And I think we need to honestly start to take it to heart a bit more, because this is a reality that not a lot of us are prepared to confront or even exist in, despite what it is that we all say we want, that we might want to see a different world or we want to be a part of something different. There is going to be a lot of restructuring and having to come to terms with the reality that the world that exists that you are wanting to be a part of, and I'm not saying it's impossible to not be a part of, but the world you want to see exist is going to require some work and some effort to make happen. Just like in our other movies today, A Million Miles and in Cool Running. So just like in those movies, those characters, there was a lot of work they had to put in to see the realities that they wanted to see. The realities don't just come to you. It takes a lot of work. And so I believe we just need to be willing and ready and prepared to put in the work to see the world that we want to see. Now, given today's topic, I feel like I shouldn't have to give a caveat, but I will give a caveat just in case. When I'm talking about like when the world turns its back on you, you turn your back on the world, and more or less creating the world you wish to be a part of and wish to be in. I do not mean people who want to abuse power or people who want to cause harm to others. You are not included in that conversation. Um, but yeah, with that being said, that's all I have for you today. Feel free to like, follow, and subscribe, and download today's episode if you're watching on a podcasting platform. I would really appreciate it. Leave a comment, tell me what you think, and yeah, feel free to follow me on my personal account. So that'll be The Lovely Infinite. It is on the screen, or if you'd like to follow all of our other projects, Art Like Studios, that's where you'll find any updates or any new things. And I also have an art collective called The CMP Collective. So feel free to follow that as well. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being. Have a great rest of your day. Bye.